The mahogany casket gleamed under the harsh funeral home lights as Amara Okonkwo stood perfectly still, her hand resting on the polished wood. Inside lay her husband of 23 years, dressed in his finest black suit, his face peaceful in death. The mortician had done excellent work. Too excellent, perhaps. Because beneath that serene expression, behind those closed eyelids, Chiwetel Okonkwo was very much alive, watching everything through a tiny camera embedded in his tie pin. From a hotel room 3 miles away, the 72-year-old billionaire sat hunched over a laptop screen, his heart pounding as he watched his own funeral preparations. This was it, the ultimate test. After building a business empire worth $800 million, after providing his family with every luxury imaginable, he would finally discover who truly loved him and who only loved his money. But what he was about to witness would destroy everything he thought he knew. Amara's fingers trembled as they traced the edge of the casket. The funeral director had stepped away, leaving her alone in the viewing room. This was the moment Chiwetel had orchestrated carefully. No witnesses. Just his wife and his supposedly dead body. He leaned closer to the screen, watching her face. Then Amara did something that made his blood run cold. She smiled. Not a sad, nostalgic smile. Not the bittersweet expression of someone remembering happy times. This was something else entirely. Something that looked almost like relief. She glanced around the empty room, then leaned down and whispered something to the body in the casket. Chiwetel turned up the volume on his laptop, straining to hear. "I know what you did, Chiwetel," she said softly. "I've always known." His hands froze on the keyboard. What was she talking about? What did she know? Amara reached into her purse and pulled out a thick envelope. She held it up to the casket as if he could see it. "These are the documents. The proof of everything. Your lawyer will receive them tomorrow morning." She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice cracked with emotion. "I just wanted you to know that I forgive you. Even after everything, I forgive you." Then she did something that shattered Chiwetel's carefully constructed plan into a million pieces. Amara began to cry. Not the performative tears he'd expected from a gold digger mourning her meal ticket. These were deep, wrenching sobs that shook her entire body. She collapsed against the casket, her shoulders heaving. "I loved you," she whispered between gasps. "God help me, I still love you. Even though you never trusted me. Even though you pushed everyone away. Even though you're doing this to test us all right now." Chiwetel's mouth fell open. She knew. Somehow, his wife knew he was alive. But that wasn't the part that would make him question everything. That would come later, when he discovered what she'd been hiding for the past 5 years. A secret so profound, so heartbreaking, that it would transform his elaborate test from a clever scheme into the greatest mistake of his life. Because sometimes, the truth isn't what destroys a family. It's the lies we tell ourselves about the people we claim to love. 6 months before the funeral, Chiwetel Okonkwo sat in his corner office on the 40th floor of the Okonkwo Tower in downtown Atlanta, staring at a financial report that should have made him happy. His company, Okonkwo Enterprises, had just closed a deal worth $50 million. His net worth had officially crossed the $800 million mark. He was one of the wealthiest African immigrants in the United States. So why did he feel so empty? He looked at the family photograph on his desk. Amara, still beautiful at 51, her dark skin glowing in the professional lighting. Their 3 children, Nneka, 28, a corporate lawyer in New York. Tobias, 25, allegedly working on his 3rd startup. And Zainab, 22, the baby of the family, supposedly finishing her master's degree at Spelman College. Supposedly. Allegedly. These words had come to dominate Chiwetel's thoughts about his own family. The truth was he barely knew them anymore. Nneka called once a month, always rushed, always asking for investment opportunities. Tobias hadn't visited in over a year, though he'd sent plenty of business proposals via email. And Zainab, his precious baby girl, seemed to avoid him entirely, finding excuses every holiday season. Even Amara had become distant. They lived in the same mansion in Buckhead, but occupied different worlds. She spent her days at charity events and spa appointments. He spent his nights in the office. They were married in name only, 2 strangers sharing an address. When had it all gone wrong? Chiwetel's phone buzzed. A text from Tobias. Dad, need to discuss an urgent investment opportunity. Call me. He sighed. Another business proposal. Never, how are you, Dad? Or, I miss you. Just money. Always money. That's when the idea first began to form. A dark, twisted idea that would either save his family or destroy it completely. What if he disappeared? What if he could watch them, really watch them, when they thought he was gone? Would they mourn him, or would they simply divide up his fortune? Did any of them actually love him, or had he simply been an ATM machine in an expensive suit? The more he thought about it, the more the idea consumed him. He'd spent his entire life building wealth for his family, sacrificing time and presence for financial security. Didn't he deserve to know if it had all been worth it? Over the next few weeks, Chiwetel began to plan. He contacted Jerome Matthews, his oldest friend and a former intelligence operative who now ran a private security firm. Jerome had connections, resources, skills that existed in the shadows of legitimate business. You want to fake your own death? Jerome had asked, his dark eyes studying Chiwetel carefully. They were sitting in a booth at a soul food restaurant in West End, far from the polished corporate environments where Chiwetel usually conducted business. I need to know the truth, Chiwetel said. About my family. About what really matters to them. Jerome leaned back, his expression troubled. Man, I've known you since we were kids in Lagos. This isn't like you. What's really going on? Chiwetel looked down at his hands. When had they become so old? When had the years slipped away? I've given them everything, Jerome. Everything. My time, my energy, my money. But I look at my life and I wonder if I've built anything real. Or if I've just been a fool, working myself to death for people who see me as a bank account. Have you tried talking to them? Talking? Chiwetel laughed bitterly. When? Between NECA's board meetings? During Tobias's pitch presentations? While Zainab is avoiding my calls. My wife and I haven't had a real conversation in years. Jerome was quiet for a long moment. Finally he nodded. If you're serious about this, I can help. But Chiwetel, you need to understand something. Once you open this door, you can't close it. Whatever you find out, you'll have to live with it. I'm already living with doubt, Chiwetel said. At least this way I'll have truth. He had no idea how wrong he was. Truth, he would learn, was far more complicated than he'd imagined. The plan came together over the following months. Jerome arranged everything with meticulous precision. A realistic body double created through Hollywood-level prosthetics and makeup. A doctor who could fake a death certificate. A mortician who could be trusted to maintain the deception. Security cameras and listening devices planted throughout the house. Even a staged heart attack at the office, complete with panicked employees and a rushed ambulance ride. The hardest part wasn't the logistics. It was the waiting. Living with his family while planning to disappear from their lives, watching them while knowing he would soon be watching them in a completely different way. During those months, Chiwetel noticed things he'd been too busy to see before. The way Amara would start to say something, then stop herself, a flicker of sadness crossing her face. The way NECA's voice sounded strained during their rare phone calls. How Tobias's business proposals always came just after Chiwetel had announced another successful deal. And Zainab, his baby girl, who could barely look him in the eye anymore. Were these the signs of people waiting for him to die? Or was something else happening, something he was too blind to see? 2 weeks before the staged death, Amara came to his study. This was unusual enough that Chiwetel looked up from his laptop, surprised. We need to talk, she said. His heart raced. Had she discovered something? About what? Amara sat down across from him, her hands folded in her lap. She looked tired, older than her years. About us. About this family. Chiwetel, we're falling apart. Business has been demanding, he said automatically. Business is always demanding, she replied. But that's not what I mean. When was the last time we all sat down together? When was the last time you asked how I'm really doing, not just if the household accounts are in order? Chiwetel felt defensive. I provide for this family. Everything you have, everything the children have, I've worked for. I know, Amara said softly. But we need more than money, Chiwetel. We need you. He wanted to believe her. But the words sounded rehearsed, like something she'd read in a marriage counseling book. I'm doing the best I can. Amara stood up, and he saw tears in her eyes. Are you? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you're running away. Like you're hiding in your work because you're afraid of something. Afraid? Of what? She looked at him for a long moment, and he saw something in her expression he couldn't quite read. Pity? Sadness? Fear? I think you're afraid that if you stop working, stop building, stop achieving, you'll have to face the fact that you don't know how to just be with us anymore. That maybe you never did. Then she left, closing the door softly behind her. Chiwetel sat alone in his study, her words echoing in his mind. But instead of considering that she might be right, instead of examining his own choices, he doubled down on his plan. This was just more evidence that he needed to test them. To know for certain where he stood. On the day of the staged heart attack, Chiwetel woke up before dawn. He looked at Amara sleeping beside him, her face peaceful in the dim light. For a moment he almost called the whole thing off. But then he remembered the distance between them, the years of growing apart, and he steeled his resolve. At 10:47 a.m., in front of a dozen employees, Chiwetel Okonkwo clutched his chest and fell to the ground. The performance was perfect. Jerome had trained him well. The ambulance arrived within minutes. At the hospital, his paid doctor pronounced him dead at 11:23 a.m. And just like that, one of Atlanta's most successful businessmen ceased to exist. Now came the real test. Now he would finally learn the truth about his family. What he didn't know was that the truth had been waiting for him all along. And it was nothing like what he expected. The news of Chiwetel Okonkwo's death spread through Atlanta's business community like wildfire. By noon, the phone calls had started. By evening, the television news was running segments about the immigrant entrepreneur who'd built an empire from nothing. By the next morning, the house in Buckhead was filled with flowers, condolence cards, and visitors. From his hotel room, Chiwetel watched it all unfold on multiple screens. Jerome had set up a sophisticated surveillance system. Cameras in every room of the house, listening devices that picked up even whispered conversations. He could see everything, hear everything, know everything. It felt like power. It felt like control. But mostly, it felt like vindication was finally within reach. Amara took the news with the kind of composure he'd expected. She didn't scream or collapse. She simply stood in the hospital corridor, nodded at the doctor's words, and made a phone call. He couldn't hear what she said, but he imagined she was calling the children. Nneka arrived first, flying in from New York that same evening. Chiwetel watched as she embraced her mother in the foyer. His daughter had always been poised, controlled. Even now, she maintained that professional demeanor, though he could see tears on her cheeks. How did it happen? Nneka asked. Heart attack, Amara said. At the office. They said it was quick. He didn't suffer. Nneka nodded, processing this information the way she'd process a legal brief. We need to contact the estate lawyers. Get the will sorted out. Figure out the business succession plans. There was less than 6 hours after his supposed death, and his daughter was already talking about money and inheritance. Chiwetel felt his suspicions crystallize into certainty. But then Nneka said something that caught him off guard. Mom, are you going to be okay? I mean really okay? I know you and Dad had your problems, but still. 23 years. Amara's composure cracked slightly. I don't know, baby. I honestly don't know. They held each other for a long moment, and Chiwetel saw something in that embrace that didn't fit his narrative. Real pain. Real grief. Or were they just good actresses? Tobias arrived the next morning. Unlike his sister, he was a mess. His eyes were red and swollen, his clothes rumpled as if he'd slept in them. When he saw Amara, he broke down completely. I can't believe he's gone, Tobias sobbed. I can't believe I'll never talk to him again. Amara held her son, stroking his hair the way she had when he was a child. I know, baby. I know. There's so much I wanted to tell him, Tobias continued. So much I needed to say. And now it's too late. Chiwetel leaned closer to the screen. What did Tobias need to tell him? Another business scheme? Another request for funding? But as he watched his son cry in his mother's arms, he felt something shift inside him. This didn't look like the grief of someone who'd lost a bank account. This looked like the grief of someone who'd lost a father. Zainab was the last to arrive, and her reaction was the most shocking of all. When she walked through the door and saw her mother and siblings, she didn't cry. She didn't break down. Instead, she turned around and walked straight back out. Amara followed her, catching up with her on the front lawn. "Zainab, please." "I can't do this," Zainab said, her voice shaking. "I can't stand in that house and pretend everything was fine. It wasn't fine, Mom. Nothing was fine." "I know," Amara said softly. "Do you?" Zainab turned to face her mother, and Chiwetel could see the anger in her expression. "Dad spent my entire life working, building his empire, making his money. And you know what? I barely knew him. The man who just died was basically a stranger to me." The words hit Chiwetel like physical blows. Was this really how his daughter saw him? As a stranger? "He loved you," Amara said. "In his own way, he loved all of us." "His own way wasn't enough," Zainab replied. "And now it's too late for him to learn any other way." She walked to her car and drove away, leaving Amara standing alone on the perfectly manicured lawn of the house that Chiwetel's money had bought. Over the next few days, the house became a hub of activity. Relatives arrived from across the country. Friends paid their respects. Business associates came to discuss the future of the company. And through it all, Chiwetel watched. He saw his brother Samuel arrive from Lagos and immediately start asking Amara about the will. He saw his business partner Marcus inquire about taking over as CEO. He saw distant cousins he barely remembered suddenly appearing, offering condolences that sounded hollow and self-serving. "See?" he thought. "This is what I expected. Everyone circling like vultures, waiting to pick at the corpse of my fortune." But he also saw other things. Things that didn't fit his cynical narrative. He saw Amara's sister Kemi arrive and hold her sister for hours, not saying anything, just being present. He saw his children's friends come by, not to network or angle for advantages, but simply to support Nneka, Tobias, and Zainab. He saw his housekeeper of 15 years, Mrs. Johnson, break down crying while arranging flowers, mourning not her employer but the man who'd always asked about her grandchildren. And he saw Amara, through it all, maintaining a strength he hadn't known she possessed. She greeted guests with grace. She made arrangements with efficiency. She held their children together when they threatened to fall apart. She did all of this while carrying her own grief, her own loss. Or was it an act? Was she simply playing the role of grieving widow while mentally calculating her inheritance? On the third day, something happened that challenged everything Chiwetel thought he knew. He was watching the camera feed from his study, the room where he'd spent so many nights working, when Amara entered. She was alone. She closed the door behind her and walked to his desk. She sat in his chair and pulled out a key from around her neck. With this key, she opened the bottom drawer of his desk, the one he always kept locked. From it, she withdrew a leather journal. Chiwetel's blood ran cold. That was his private journal, where he'd written his most intimate thoughts, his business strategies, his doubts and fears. How did she have a key? Had she been reading it all along? But Amara didn't open the journal. Instead, she held it to her chest and began to speak, as if he could hear her. "I found this 5 years ago," she said. "I didn't mean to. I was looking for a pen and I saw the drawer was unlocked. Just that once. Just that one time in all these years." She was quiet for a moment, tears streaming down her face. "I read it, Chiwetel. I know I shouldn't have, but I did. And you know what I found? I found the man I fell in love with. The one who was afraid of failure. Afraid of not being enough. Afraid that if he stopped working, stopped achieving, stopped building, everyone would leave him." She opened the journal now, turning to a specific page. "There's an entry here from 15 years ago. You wrote, 'Sometimes I feel like an imposter. Like at any moment, they'll all realize I'm just a poor boy from Lagos who got lucky. And when they realize it, they'll leave. Amara will leave. The children will leave. Everyone will see that I'm not really the success they think I am.'" Amara closed the journal and looked directly at the camera. For a moment, Chiwetel had the irrational thought that she could see him, that she knew he was watching. "I've known for 5 years that you've been afraid," she said. "And I've spent 5 years trying to show you that we're not going anywhere. That we love you for who you are, not what you've built. But you wouldn't let me in. You just kept working harder, building more, creating more distance." She stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the garden they'd planted together when they first bought the house. "I kept your secret," she continued. "I never told you I'd read the journal. I thought if I just showed you enough love, enough patience, you'd eventually trust me. Trust us. But you never did. And now you're gone, and I have to live with the fact that you died still afraid. Still doubting. Still alone even though you were surrounded by people who loved you." She placed the journal back in the drawer and locked it. As she turned to leave, she said one more thing. "I hope you found peace, Chiwetel. I hope wherever you are, you finally understand that you were always enough. You were always loved. And we would have stayed even if you'd lost everything." Then she left the room, leaving Chiwetel staring at the empty screen, his carefully constructed certainties beginning to crumble. Could he have been wrong? Could she really have known about his fears all along? Could she have been trying to reach him while he was busy testing her? No, he told himself. This was manipulation. She knew about the cameras somehow. She was performing for him. She had to be. But deep down, in a place he didn't want to examine too closely, he wondered if maybe, just maybe, he'd made a terrible mistake. The funeral was scheduled for Saturday, 5 days after Chiwetel's supposed death. Those 5 days were a masterclass in human behavior, and Chiwetel watched every moment with the intensity of a scientist observing a critical experiment. He saw Marcus, his business partner of 20 years, meet secretly with the company's board of directors. Through the surveillance system, Chiwetel listened as Marcus laid out his vision for taking over as CEO. It was a good pitch, professional and strategic. But it was also clear that Marcus had been preparing for this opportunity. How long had he been waiting for Chiwetel to get out of the way? He saw Samuel, his younger brother, pull Nneka aside to discuss the family holdings in Nigeria. "Your father and I had an understanding," Samuel said. "Certain properties were meant to be mine. I trust you'll honor his wishes." But Chiwetel had made no such promises. Samuel was lying, trying to manipulate his niece into giving him assets he had no claim to. He saw Tobias meet with a group of investors, pitching them on a new startup. "With my father's passing, I'll be inheriting significant resources," Tobias told them. "I'm ready to take his entrepreneurial legacy to the next level." Was that grief in his son's voice, or was it excitement about finally having access to money without having to ask? But he also saw things that didn't fit the narrative of a family of opportunists. He saw Nneka break down crying in her old bedroom at 3 in the morning, clutching a photograph of her and Chiwetel from her college graduation. "I'm sorry I was always so busy, Daddy," she whispered to the photo. "I thought I had time. I thought we had time." He saw Tobias delete all his investor emails and spend an entire afternoon going through old home videos, watching footage of Chiwetel teaching him to ride a bike, helping him with homework, attending his soccer games. "When did we stop doing things together?" Tobias asked the empty room. "When did I become just another person asking you for money?" He saw Zainab return to the house late one night, thinking everyone was asleep. She went to the study and stood in the doorway for a long time, not entering. Finally, she said, "I was going to tell you, Dad. I was going to tell you everything. I was just waiting for the right time. But I guess there's no such thing as the right time, is there? There's just time, and then there's no more time." What was she going to tell him? What secret was his youngest daughter carrying? And then there was Amara, his wife of 23 years. The woman he'd planned to expose as a gold digger. She barely slept. Chiwetel watched as she moved through the house at night, touching his things, sitting in his chair, standing in doorways of rooms where they'd shared moments he'd forgotten. She didn't cry much. Instead, she seemed to be having a private conversation with his memory, working through something complex and painful. On the 4th night, Jerome visited Chiwetel at the hotel. His old friend looked troubled. "You need to see something," Jerome said, pulling out a tablet. "My team found this while monitoring the house communications." He showed Chiwetel a series of emails between Amara and a doctor in New York. As Chiwetel read them, his understanding of reality began to tilt. The emails went back 5 years. They discussed treatments, prognosis, survival rates. They talked about clinical trials and experimental therapies. They mentioned words like stage 3, and remission, and recurrence. Amara had cancer. His wife had cancer. And she'd been fighting it for 5 years without telling him. Why wouldn't she tell me? Chiwetel asked, his voice barely a whisper. Jerome looked at him with something like pity. Keep reading. There was an email from 3 years ago. Amara writing to the doctor, I've decided not to tell my husband about the diagnosis. He's under so much stress with the business. I don't want to add to his burden. Besides, he's so distant now. I'm not sure he'd know how to handle it, and I can't carry both my illness and his inability to cope with it. Another email from 2 years ago. The children still don't know. I've gotten very good at hiding the effects of treatment. The wigs are expensive but worth it. I schedule my chemo on days when Chiwetel is traveling. It's easier this way. Easier to be strong alone than to be weak together. And then an email from 6 months ago. The cancer is back. The doctors say I have maybe a year, possibly 2 with aggressive treatment. I'm still not telling my family. I want them to remember me as strong, not as a burden. Chiwetel especially. He'll blame himself. He'll throw money at the problem. And when money can't fix it, he won't know what to do. I'd rather die with dignity than watch him fall apart. Chiwetel's hands were shaking. She's dying. My wife is dying and I didn't even notice. There's more, Jerome said quietly. He scrolled to another folder. After we started the surveillance, my team noticed something odd. Amara's been visiting a law office. We tracked her there yesterday. Turns out she's been setting up a foundation. The Okonkwo Family Foundation. She's putting all her inheritance into it. Everything you plan to leave her, she's giving away. To who? Educational scholarships for first-generation Nigerian-American students. Medical research for cancer treatment. Small business loans for immigrant entrepreneurs. Jerome looked at him steadily. She's not keeping a dime for herself. Every penny is going to help other people. Chiwetel felt like he was falling. Everything he thought he knew, everything he'd built this test upon, was crumbling. Boss, Jerome said carefully, I think you need to call this off. End it now. Tell them you're alive. Because if you don't, you're going to lose something you can't get back. But Chiwetel couldn't speak. He was watching the surveillance feed, seeing Amara in the kitchen with the children, planning the funeral of a man who wasn't dead. Planning the funeral of a man who was so convinced of her betrayal that he'd abandoned her while she fought cancer alone. What kind of monster had he become? The funeral is tomorrow, Jerome continued. After that, this ends. That was the plan. You're going to reveal yourself, right? You're going to tell them it was all a test. Chiwetel nodded numbly. That had been the plan. Fake the funeral, watch their reactions, then reveal himself and expose the truth. But what truth would he be exposing? That his wife had loved him enough to protect him from her pain? That his children had been flawed humans trying to cope with an increasingly distant father? That he'd been so wrapped up in his own insecurities that he'd missed everything that actually mattered? Now do you understand what makes this story so powerful? What made his wife's actions so heartbreaking? A woman fighting cancer alone because she loved her husband too much to burden him with her illness, while that same husband was testing her loyalty from the shadows. Before we continue with what happens at the funeral and how this family deals with the truth, I want you to think about something. Have you ever misjudged someone? Have you ever been so sure you were right about a person that you missed who they really were? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if you're watching from somewhere in the world right now, let me know where you're from. Let's see how many countries are represented in our community. Also, if this story is keeping you on the edge of your seat, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and like this video. Share it with someone who loves a powerful story. Trust me, you don't want to miss what happens next. The morning of the funeral arrived with gray skies and a light drizzle, as if the weather itself was mourning. From his hotel room, Chiwetel dressed in dark clothes, preparing for the most surreal experience of his life, attending his own funeral. Jerome had arranged everything. A disguise, subtle but effective. Colored contact lenses that changed his eye color. Temporary hairpiece that gave him more hair and a different style. Glasses with clear lenses. A slight padding that changed his build. Most importantly, a carefully crafted mustache and subtle makeup that aged him differently. He looked like someone's uncle, someone's colleague, someone who might reasonably attend a funeral. Not like Chiwetel Okonkwo. Last chance to back out, Jerome said as he helped with the final touches. You can still end this before it goes too far. But Chiwetel shook his head. He needed to see this through. Needed to witness how they said goodbye. Needed to understand, finally and completely, who his family really was. The funeral was being held at the Cathedral of St. Philip in Buckhead, a beautiful church where Amara had occasionally attended services. Chiwetel had never been particularly religious, preferring to worship at the altar of work and achievement. Now he would be worshipped, in a way, by people who thought he was dead. He arrived early and sat in the back, watching as the church filled. There were hundreds of people. Business associates, employees, friends, family, community members. Some he recognized, many he didn't. Had his life really touched this many people? The casket sat at the front of the church, closed. Inside was the prosthetic body double, so realistic that even the mortician had been impressed with Jerome's work. Flowers surrounded it, elaborate arrangements sent by corporations, charities, and individuals. Chiwetel watched as his family filed in. Amara looked elegant in black, her head held high despite the weight she must be carrying. Her wig was perfect. He never would have known it wasn't her real hair if Jerome hadn't told him. How many other things had he failed to see? Nneka walked beside her mother, professional and composed. She'd probably cried privately, but in public she maintained the poise expected of a corporate lawyer. Tobias looked devastated, his eyes red and swollen. And Zainab, his baby girl, looked angry. Her jaw was set, her hands clenched. She was furious at death, at fate, at him for leaving. The service began. The pastor spoke about Chiwetel's life, his journey from Lagos to Atlanta, his business success, his family. It was a good eulogy, touching and appropriate. But it felt like it was about someone else. Some idealized version of Chiwetel that had never really existed. Then came time for the family to speak. Nneka went first. She walked to the podium with the same confidence she probably brought to courtroom arguments. But when she started speaking, her voice cracked. My father was complicated, she said. He wasn't perfect. He worked too much. He was emotionally distant. He measured success in numbers and achievements rather than moments and memories. Chiwetel felt each word like a knife. But, Nneka continued, he was also brilliant, driven, and determined to give us a better life than he had. He came to this country with nothing and built an empire. He made sure I never had to struggle the way he did. And even though I sometimes resented how much time his work took, I understand now that everything he did was for us. She paused, wiping her eyes. I just wish I'd told him that I understood. I wish I'd called more. Visited more. I wish I'd made time the way he made money. Because in the end, we always think we have more time than we do. Dad, if you can hear me wherever you are, I'm sorry. I'm sorry I didn't tell you I was proud of you. I'm sorry I let work become an excuse to avoid the difficult conversations. I love you. I always have. She returned to her seat, and Tobias took her place at the podium. Tobias didn't even make it through his first sentence before breaking down. I can't do this, he said, sobbing. I can't stand here and pretend I was a good son. I wasn't. I only called when I needed money. I only visited when I wanted something. And the worst part is, Dad knew it. He knew I was using him, and he let me anyway because he loved me. The congregation was silent, watching this young man fall apart. I have all these business proposals in my email, Tobias continued. All these pitches and plans. And you know what Dad did? He saved every single one. Even the stupid ones. Even the ones that made no sense. I found them on his computer. He'd saved them in a folder called Tobias Dreams. Like he was keeping track of my dreams, even though I'd given up on most of them. Tobias looked at the casket. I wanted to make you proud, he said. But I kept failing. And instead of learning from my failures like you did, I just kept asking for more money to try again. I'm 25 years old, and I've accomplished nothing except being your son. And now you're gone, and I'll never get the chance to actually earn your respect instead of just asking for your money." He walked back to his seat, and Amara reached out to hold his hand. Then Zainab stood up. Unlike her siblings, she didn't walk to the podium. Instead, she stood in her place and spoke loudly enough for everyone to hear. "I'm not going to lie and say my father was perfect," she said, her voice sharp with anger. "He wasn't. He chose work over family. He chose money over relationships. He chose success over presence." Murmurs rippled through the congregation. This wasn't the tone expected at a funeral. But you know what else he was? He was human. He was scared. He was insecure. He was a man who came from nothing and spent his entire life terrified that he'd lose everything, so he kept building walls made of money and achievements. Zainab's voice softened slightly. "I was angry at him for a long time. Angry that he missed my dance recitals. Angry that he sent a check instead of coming to my college graduation. Angry that every conversation we had eventually turned into a discussion about my future earning potential. But then I realized something. My father didn't know how to love any other way. His father abandoned him when he was 8. His mother died when he was 15. He raised himself and his brother on the streets of Lagos. The only love he understood was the kind that provided, that protected, that built security." She looked at the casket, and tears finally came. "I came out to Mom 2 years ago," she said. "I'm gay. And I didn't tell Dad because I was terrified he'd reject me. Terrified he'd see me as a failure, as someone who couldn't give him grandchildren or continue his legacy the way he wanted. But Mom told me something. She said Dad had asked about me, noticed I was distant, and when she hinted that I might be struggling with something, he said, 'Whatever it is, it doesn't matter. She's my daughter. Nothing could make me love her less.'" Chiwetel's breath caught. He remembered that conversation with Amara. It had been brief, awkward. He'd been uncomfortable discussing emotions. But he'd meant what he said. "I never got to tell him," Zainab continued. "I never got to hear him say it to my face. I was waiting for the perfect moment, and now that moment will never come. So let this be a lesson to everyone here. Don't wait. Don't assume you have time. Tell the people you love that you love them. Have the hard conversations. Make the time. Because one day, time runs out." She sat down, and the church was silent except for the sound of people crying. Then Amara stood. She moved to the podium with a grace that seemed impossible given everything Chiwetel now knew she was carrying. She looked out at the congregation, and her eyes swept across the back of the church. For a moment, her gaze seemed to land on him, and he felt his heart stop. Could she see through the disguise? Did she know? 23 years ago, Amara began, I married a man who was afraid of everything but pretended to be afraid of nothing. Chiwetel Okonkwo was the bravest coward I ever met. Nervous laughter rippled through the crowd. He was brave enough to leave everything he knew in Nigeria and come to America with $200 and a dream. Brave enough to start a business when everyone told him he'd fail. Brave enough to compete with people who had every advantage he didn't. But he was also a coward about the things that mattered most. He was afraid to be vulnerable. Afraid to admit he needed help. Afraid to believe that people could love him for who he was rather than what he provided. Amara's voice remained steady, but tears streamed down her face. 5 years ago, I was diagnosed with cancer. Stage 3. I didn't tell my husband because I knew he would blame himself. I knew he would try to fix it with money and resources, and when he couldn't fix it, he would break. So I carried it alone. I went through chemo alone. I celebrated being in remission alone. And when it came back 6 months ago, I faced that alone too. Gasps filled the church. Neka stood up, shocked. Mom, what are you talking about? Amara held up a hand. Let me finish, baby. Please. She turned back to the congregation. I kept this secret because I loved my husband. Not in spite of his flaws, but including them. I loved him enough to protect him from my pain. But I also kept this secret because I was angry at him. Angry that he'd become so distant that I couldn't share my burden. Angry that our marriage had devolved into two people living parallel lives in the same house. Angry that he was so busy testing everyone else's loyalty that he couldn't see the love that was right in front of him. Chiwetel felt like he'd been punched in the gut. She knew. Somehow, she knew about the test. Yes, Amara said, as if reading his mind, I knew about the test. I've known from the beginning. The congregation erupted in confused murmurs. Test? What was she talking about? Amara reached into her purse and pulled out a small device. An audio recorder. She pressed play. Jerome's voice filled the church. So you want to fake your own death to test your family? Then Chiwetel's voice. I need to know the truth about them. About what really matters to them. The congregation gasped. Neka's hand flew to her mouth. Tobias looked like he might be sick. Zainab just stared at the casket with an expression of horror. I found the recorder in his study 3 weeks ago, Amara explained. He'd been practicing what to say to Jerome. He forgot to delete the recording. And in that moment, I understood. My husband, the man I'd loved for over 2 decades, trusted his surveillance equipment more than he trusted his own family. She walked toward the casket. So I made a choice. I decided to let him have his test. I decided to let him watch and listen and judge. Because I had nothing to hide. I loved him. Flawed, broken, suspicious, distant as he was, I loved him. And I wanted him to see that. Not because I performed for his cameras, but because it was the truth. Amara placed her hand on the casket. But here's what you didn't understand, Chiwetel. The test wasn't for us. It was for you. You were testing yourself. Testing whether you could trust love when you'd never really learned how to accept it. And you failed. You failed because you're lying in this casket thinking you won, thinking you caught us all being fake, when really all you caught was a family that loved you despite your inability to believe it. She turned back to the congregation. My husband is dead. Not in the way you think, but in the way that matters. The man I married died years ago, slowly buried under work and fear and doubt. What's in that casket is just the final proof. Then she did something extraordinary. She walked to the back of the church, directly toward Chiwetel. He froze, unable to move, unable to breathe. She stopped right in front of him and looked directly into his eyes. Hello, Chiwetel, she said softly. Did you get what you came for? The church exploded into chaos. For a moment, Chiwetel couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't process what was happening. Everyone in the church was staring at him. His disguise, which had seemed so clever, now felt like a child's costume. Foolish and transparent. Mom, what are you doing? Neka called from the front. That's not Dad. Dad is in a hotel room watching surveillance feeds? Amara finished. Or maybe he's here, wearing a disguise that I noticed the moment he walked in because I've studied his face, his posture, his mannerisms for 23 years. She reached out and gently removed Chiwetel's glasses. Then the fake mustache. The disguise that had taken Jerome hours to apply came apart in seconds under her careful hands. And there he was. Chiwetel Okonkwo. Very much alive. Very much exposed. The church erupted. People were shouting, crying, standing up. Neka was running down the aisle. Tobias looked like he was in shock. Zainab's face had gone from anger to something Chiwetel couldn't read. You're alive? Neka reached them, her voice a mixture of joy and fury. You're alive and you let us think you were dead? I can explain, Chiwetel started, but his voice came out as a whisper. Explain. Tobias had joined them now. Explain what? That you faked your own death to spy on us? That you put Mom through planning a funeral? That you made us believe we'd lost you? Zainab arrived last. She didn't say anything. She just looked at her father with such disappointment that he wished he actually was in the casket. Everyone please, Amara said, her voice cutting through the chaos. I know this is shocking, but I need you all to sit down. We're going to finish this funeral. Because even though Chiwetel is physically alive, something did die. And we need to bury it properly before we can move forward. The congregation, confused but captivated by the drama unfolding, slowly returned to their seats. This was better than any reality TV show. This was real life falling apart in real time. Amara guided Chiwetel to the front of the church. He moved like a man in a dream, his carefully constructed plans shattered around him. At the front, she positioned him next to the casket that held the fake body. "Open it," she said. "Amara, please," he whispered. "Not here. Not like this." "Open it," she repeated. "Let everyone see what you've done." With shaking hands, Chiwetel opened the casket. The prosthetic body lay there, realistic but obviously fake now that people could see it up close. Gasps and murmurs filled the church. "This," Amara announced to the congregation, "is what fear looks like. This is what happens when a man is so consumed by insecurity that he stages his own death to prove that people only love him for his money." She turned to Chiwetel. "Did you find what you were looking for? Did your cameras and your recordings and your surveillance give you the proof you needed? Did you catch us being the greedy, disloyal family you were so certain we were?" Chiwetel's throat was tight. "I saw Samuel trying to steal from the estate. I saw Marcus planning to take over the company. You saw a brother who's always been jealous of your success being himself," Amara interrupted. "You saw a business partner who's been running half the company for 20 years wondering if he'd finally get recognition. You saw exactly what you wanted to see because you were looking for betrayal instead of love." "That's not fair," Chiwetel said weakly. "Fair." Amara's composure finally cracked. Her voice rose. "You want to talk about fair? Is it fair that I fought cancer alone because my husband was too busy to notice I was dying? Is it fair that your children had to grieve a father they barely knew because you chose work over family? Is it fair that we all had to play out this sick test because you couldn't just talk to us like a normal human being?" "I didn't know about the cancer," Chiwetel said. "If I'd known—" "You would have thrown money at it," Amara finished. "You would have hired the best doctors, flown me to the best hospitals, bought the most expensive treatments. And you would have felt like you were being a good husband because you were fixing the problem. But you know what I needed? I needed you to hold my hand during chemo. I needed you to sit with me on the bad days. I needed you to see me, really see me, not as a problem to solve but as a person who was scared and in pain." Tears were streaming down her face now. "But you couldn't do that. Because seeing people requires vulnerability. It requires being present. And you've spent our entire marriage running away from presence." Nneka stepped forward. "Dad, is this true? Did you really fake your death to test us?" Chiwetel looked at his daughter. He saw Amara's eyes, his own determination. He saw a woman who'd built a successful career while he'd been too busy to notice. He saw the little girl who used to wait by the door for him to come home from work, before she stopped waiting. "Yes," he admitted. "I did." "Why?" Tobias asked. "Why would you do that to us?" How could he explain the doubt that had consumed him? The certainty that he'd built his entire life on a foundation of transactions rather than love? The fear that if he stopped being successful, stopped being wealthy, stopped being useful, everyone would leave? "I was afraid," he said finally. "Afraid that none of you really loved me. That you only loved what I could give you." "So you tested us?" Zainab said. "Like we were employees taking a performance review? Like our love needed to be audited?" "I needed to know the truth." "The truth?" Zainab laughed bitterly. "Dad, you're a billionaire who has everything except the ability to trust the people who love him. That's the truth. And instead of dealing with that, instead of going to therapy or talking to mom or being an actual human being, you faked your own death. That's not looking for truth. That's running away from it." She was right. They were all right. Chiwetel saw it now with painful clarity. He'd been so convinced of his own narrative, so certain of everyone else's betrayal, that he'd created a self-fulfilling prophecy. He'd pushed them away and then blamed them for the distance. "I'm sorry," he said. The words felt inadequate, too small for the magnitude of what he'd done. "Sorry." Amara shook her head. "Sorry doesn't cover this, Chiwetel. Sorry is what you say when you forget an anniversary or miss a recital. This is beyond sorry." She turned to the congregation. "I want everyone here to witness this. I want you all to see what happens when fear destroys a family. Because that's what this is. Not a tragedy. Not a misunderstanding. A destruction caused by one man's inability to trust the people who loved him. She pulled out a thick envelope from her purse. The same envelope Chiwetel had seen her hold up to the casket days ago. "These are divorce papers," she announced. "I had my lawyer draw them up 3 weeks ago, when I found out about your plan. I've been carrying them ever since, trying to decide if I should file them." Chiwetel's world tilted. "Amara, please. Let's talk about this privately." "But you didn't respect my privacy when you planted cameras in our home. You didn't respect our children's privacy when you recorded their conversations. Why should I respect yours now?" She opened the envelope and pulled out the papers. "But I've made a decision. I'm not filing for divorce." Relief flooded through Chiwetel, but it was short-lived. "I'm doing something worse," Amara continued. "I'm giving you exactly what you wanted. Distance. Separation. The ability to watch your family without being part of it." She handed him the papers. "These aren't divorce papers. They're emancipation papers. I'm legally separating myself from your business, your money, your empire. Everything you built, everything you accumulated, everything you used to measure your worth, stays with you. I want none of it." "Mom, what are you doing?" Nneka asked, alarmed. "What I should have done years ago," Amara replied. "I'm choosing myself. I'm choosing truth over comfort. I'm choosing to live whatever time I have left on my own terms, not as the wife of a man who doesn't trust me." She looked at Nneka, Tobias, and Zainab. "Your father is alive. That's wonderful. You can have whatever relationship with him you want. But I'm done. I'm done trying to prove my love to someone who refuses to believe in it. I'm done being tested and surveilled and doubted." She turned back to Chiwetel. "You wanted to know if I loved you for your money? Now you'll never know. Because I'm walking away from all of it. The house, the cars, the accounts, everything. I'm taking only what I came into this marriage with. My dignity, my self-respect, and my truth." The church was silent. Even the sound of breathing seemed too loud. "But Amara," Chiwetel said desperately, "what about treatment? The cancer. You need." "I need nothing from you," she said firmly. "I have my own insurance. My own savings from before we were married. And if that's not enough, then that's okay too. I'd rather die free than live wealthy and doubted." She started walking toward the exit. Nneka grabbed her arm. "Mom, please. Don't do this. We can work this out. We're family." Amara cupped her daughter's face gently. "Baby, I love you more than life itself. And I will always be your mother. But I can't be his wife anymore. Some things, once broken, can't be fixed." She left the church, leaving Chiwetel standing next to a fake casket that held a fake body, while his real life crumbled around him. The congregation began to disperse, people whispering and staring. Some looked at Chiwetel with disgust. Others with pity. A few with fascination, already planning how they'd tell this story at dinner parties for years to come. His children stood around him, forming a circle that felt more like a barrier than an embrace. "What happens now?" Tobias asked. Chiwetel looked at his son. "I don't know." "Well," Nneka said coldly, "you better figure it out. Because you just lost the best thing that ever happened to you." She followed her mother out of the church. Zainab went next, not even looking at her father. Tobias lingered for a moment. "I meant what I said in my eulogy, Dad. I wanted to make you proud. But you know what? I don't think I can. Because I don't think you're capable of being proud of anyone except yourself." Then he too was gone, and Chiwetel was alone in the church with Jerome, who had watched the entire catastrophe unfold from the back. "I tried to warn you," Jerome said, walking up to the front. "I told you this would blow up in your face." "She knew," Chiwetel said numbly. "The whole time she knew." "Of course she knew. Amara is brilliant. She's been 10 steps ahead of you your entire marriage. You were just too arrogant to notice." Chiwetel sank into the front pew. "What have I done?" "You've spent a fortune to prove that you're a fool," Jerome said bluntly. "And you've lost your family in the process. The question is, what are you going to do about it?" Chiwetel looked at the fake body in the casket. In a way, Amar was right. Something had died. The version of himself that he'd been clinging to, the narrative he'd built about being a self-made man who trusted no one. That version was dead. But what came next? Who was Chiwetel Okonkwo without his certainty? Without his suspicion? Without his tests and his surveillance and his need to control everything? He didn't know. For the first time in his adult life, he genuinely didn't know. And that terrified him more than any business failure ever had. 3 days passed in a blur of chaos and consequences. The story of Chiwetel's fake death spread like wildfire through Atlanta and beyond. Social media exploded with opinions, judgments, and hot takes. Some people called him a genius for exposing his family. Most called him a monster. Memes were created. Think pieces were written. His business ethics were questioned. His mental health was debated by strangers on the internet. Okonkwo Enterprises went into crisis mode. The board called an emergency meeting. Investors demanded explanations. Marcus submitted his resignation, not out of loyalty but out of disgust. "I've worked with you for 20 years, he told Chiwetel during their final conversation. "And I never knew you thought so little of everyone around you." The house in Buckhead felt like a mausoleum. Amara had taken only her personal belongings and moved into a modest apartment in Midtown. She'd left behind everything else: the designer clothes, the jewelry, the cars, all the trappings of wealth. True to her word, she wanted nothing from him. His children weren't answering his calls. He'd tried dozens of times. Left countless voicemails. Sent lengthy text messages. Nothing. They'd cut him off completely, and he couldn't blame them. Chiwetel found himself wandering through the empty house, seeing it differently now. This room where they'd had Christmas dinners, before the dinners became uncomfortable and eventually stopped. This hallway where Zainab had practiced her dance routines. This study where he'd hidden from his family while convincing himself he was providing for them. Every corner held a memory he'd been too busy to appreciate at the time. Every room echoed with conversations he'd been too distracted to fully hear. The house wasn't empty because everyone had left. It had always been empty because he'd never really been present in it. On the 4th day, there was a knock at the door. Chiwetel opened it to find a woman he didn't recognize. She was perhaps 40, professional-looking, carrying a briefcase. "Mr. Okonkwo? I'm Dr. Sarah Chin. I'm a family therapist, and your wife has asked me to deliver something to you." She handed him another envelope. Inside was a letter in Amara's handwriting. "Chiwetel," it began. "I'm not ready to see you or speak to you, but Dr. Chin has agreed to serve as an intermediary. She's offered to meet with you, if you're willing. Not to save our marriage, that's over, but to help you understand why you did what you did, and maybe help you repair your relationship with our children. They're willing to try, but only if you do the work. Real work. Not money or grand gestures, but actual emotional work. The choice is yours." Chiwetel looked at Dr. Chin. "She sent you to be my therapist? I don't work for your wife, Mr. Okonkwo. I work for the health and healing of families. Amara reached out because she believes, despite everything, that you're capable of change. She thinks there's still a person underneath all that fear and control who deserves a chance at redemption. Do you believe that?" Dr. Chin smiled slightly. "It doesn't matter what I believe. It matters what you're willing to do." That's how Chiwetel found himself, for the first time in his life, sitting in a therapist's office. Not because a court ordered it. Not because it would help his business reputation. But because he'd run out of other options. Dr. Chen's office was simple, comfortable. Nothing like the sleek, expensive spaces where Chiwetel usually conducted business. There were plants on the windowsill, abstract art on the walls, tissues on the table. It felt almost unbearably vulnerable. "Tell me about your childhood," Dr. Chen said, once they'd settled in. "That's a cliché," Chiwetel replied. "It's a cliché because it's usually where the patterns start. So humor me. Tell me about growing up in Lagos." And slowly, painfully, Chiwetel began to talk. He told her about his father, who'd left when Chiwetel was 8, disappearing one day without explanation. He told her about his mother, who'd worked 3 jobs to feed him, and his brother, who'd died from exhaustion when he was 15. He told her about raising Samuel on the streets, learning that the only person you could trust was yourself. "I built everything from nothing," he said. "Everything I have, I earned. No one gave me anything." That's a powerful story, Dr. Chen said. It's also a lonely one. Lonely? You've constructed your entire identity around being self-made, around not needing anyone. But humans aren't meant to be self-made. We're meant to be made in community, in relationship, in connection with others. That's easy to say when you haven't had people abandon you. You're right. It is easier. But let me ask you something. Your father left when you were 8. Your mother died when you were 15. How old are you now? 72. So you've spent 57 years punishing everyone in your life for things that happened when you were a child. Don't you think it's time to stop? The question hung in the air. Chiwetel wanted to argue, to defend himself. But he couldn't, because she was right. Over the next few weeks, Chiwetel met with Dr. Chen 3 times a week. It was excruciating. She made him examine every assumption he'd built his life upon. Every defense mechanism he'd constructed. Every wall he'd erected. Let's talk about the test, she said during their 5th session. What did you really hope to gain from it? I wanted the truth. No. You wanted confirmation of what you already believed. That's different. If you'd really wanted the truth, you would have asked your family directly. You would have said, I'm feeling insecure about whether you love me or for my money. But you didn't do that. Why? Because they would have lied. Would they? Or would you have dismissed their truth because it didn't match your fear? Chiwetel was quiet. Here's what I think happened, Dr. Chen continued. I think you were terrified that if you showed vulnerability, if you admitted you needed reassurance, your family would confirm your worst fear. That you weren't lovable without the money and success. So instead of risking that, you created a test that you controlled. A test where you could watch from a distance and maintain your emotional safety. But I was right about some things. Samuel did try to steal. Marcus did plan to take over the company. Maybe. Or maybe Samuel has always felt inadequate compared to you and was trying to claim something for himself. Maybe Marcus has run half your company for 20 years and deserved to be considered for leadership. The point isn't whether your observations were factually correct. The point is that you were looking for betrayal instead of understanding. She leaned forward. Chiwetel, your wife was dying of cancer and didn't tell you. Not because she didn't love you, but because she loved you too much to burden you. Your daughter was struggling with her sexuality and didn't come to you. Not because she didn't trust you, but because she was afraid of disappointing you. Your children became distant. Not because they didn't care, but because they didn't know how to reach you. Every person in your life was trying to protect you from their pain, and you interpreted it as betrayal. Tears were streaming down Chiwetel's face now. He hadn't cried in decades. Hadn't allowed himself the vulnerability of tears. But now, in this simple office with this patient woman, the dam broke. I don't know how to fix this, he said. I know. But recognizing that is the first step. It took 2 months before his children agreed to see him. Not at the house. Not in his office. They chose neutral ground, a park in Grant Park, where they used to come when the children were young. Back before everything got complicated. Back before Chiwetel forgot how to be a father and only knew how to be a provider. They all arrived separately. Nneka first, dressed in business casual even on a Saturday. Tobias next, looking nervous. Zainab last, her jaw set in that determined way she'd had since childhood. Dr. Chen had prepared Chiwetel for this meeting. Don't try to explain yourself, she'd coached. Don't make excuses. Just listen. Let them say what they need to say. And when it's your turn, speak from the heart, not from the head. They sat at a picnic table, the 4 of them. For a long moment, no one spoke. The silence was heavy with everything unsaid, everything broken. Finally, Nneka broke the ice. Dr. Chen said you've been going to therapy. 3 times a week, Chiwetel confirmed. For 2 months. Is it helping? It's revealing things I didn't want to see. So yes, I suppose it's helping. Tobias spoke next. Dad, I need to know something. When you were watching us, when you were testing us, did you enjoy it? Did you feel vindicated? Chiwetel wanted to lie, to soften the truth. But Dr. Chen's voice echoed in his head. Honesty. Vulnerability. Truth. At first, yes, he admitted. When I saw Samuel trying to claim property that wasn't his, When I saw Marcus planning to take over the company, I felt like I'd been right all along. Like I'd been smart to not trust anyone. And then? Zainab asked. And then I saw your mother. I saw her fighting cancer alone. I saw her creating a foundation to give away her inheritance. I saw her loving me even when she knew I was testing her. And I realized I wasn't watching my family. I was watching my own failure reflected back at me. He looked at each of them. I saw Nneka breaking down at 3 in the morning, apologizing to a photograph. I saw Tobias delete his business emails and watch old home videos, wondering when we'd stopped being a family. I saw Zainab standing in my study doorway, saying she'd wanted to tell me about her life but didn't know how. His voice cracked. I saw a family that loved me despite my failures. And instead of being grateful, instead of being humbled, I felt exposed. Because if you all really loved me, then I'd been wrong. Wrong about everything. Wrong to hide behind work. Wrong to measure my worth in dollars. Wrong to build walls instead of bridges. And facing that truth was more painful than believing you were all just after my money. Nneka wiped her eyes. Dad, do you know why I became a lawyer? He shook his head. Because you told me once, when I was 10 years old, that lawyers protect people. That they stand between the powerful and the powerless and make sure everyone gets justice. You said it like you believed it. Like it was the most important thing in the world. And I wanted to be important to you, so I became what you said was important. She laughed bitterly. But then I got to law school and realized corporate law paid better. And I thought, Dad will be proud if I'm successful. So I chased success instead of justice. I became exactly what I thought you wanted, and in the process, I lost what you originally inspired. I never meant, Chiwetel started. I know, Nneka interrupted. But that's the thing, Dad. You never meant a lot of things. You never meant to be distant. You never meant to prioritize work over family. You never meant to make us feel like our value was measured in achievement. But you did. Intent doesn't erase impact. Tobias spoke up. I've failed at everything I've tried. 3 startups, all disasters. I kept coming to you for money because I thought maybe if I just had enough resources, I could finally succeed. Finally make you proud. I've always been proud of you, Chiwetel said. Have you? Tobias challenged. Because I can't remember the last time you said it. I can remember you writing checks. I can remember you critiquing my business plans. I can remember you suggesting I go back to school or get a real job. But I can't remember you just saying, son, I'm proud of you for trying. Chiwetel realized with painful clarity that Tobias was right. He'd given money but withheld approval. He'd provided resources but not validation. And me? Zainab said. I'm your daughter who likes women. I dance instead of doing business. I study art history instead of economics. I'm basically everything you didn't plan for, everything that doesn't fit your vision of the Okonkwo legacy. That's not true, Chiwetel protested. Isn't it? Dad, I've been terrified to tell you I'm gay because I've spent my whole life watching you measure value in productivity and success. And what value does a gay daughter have in building a business dynasty? Can't marry a powerful man. Can't produce heirs to continue the name. Can't be the kind of daughter you expected. I don't care that you're gay, Chiwetel said. I meant what I told your mother. Nothing could make me love you less. Then why didn't you tell me that? Zainab's voice broke. Why did I have to hear it secondhand? Why have we never talked about my life, my relationships, my dreams? Why is everything always about the business, the money, the empire? The questions hung in the air, each one an indictment. Because I don't know how to be anything else, Chiwetel admitted. I learned from my father that men leave. I learned from my mother that love means sacrifice. I learned from the streets that trust gets you killed. And I built my entire life on those lessons. But they were the wrong lessons. He took a deep breath. Your mother said something at the funeral. She said I'm a coward about the things that matter most. She's right. I've been brave in business, fearless in negotiations, willing to risk everything for success. But when it comes to emotion, to vulnerability, to actually connecting with the people I love, I'm terrified. Why? Nneka asked. Because if I let you in, really let you in, And you left anyway, it would destroy me. If I gave you my whole heart and you rejected it, I wouldn't survive. So I gave you pieces. Money, opportunities, resources. Things I could afford to lose. But Dad, Tobias said softly, we never wanted pieces. We wanted you. The simplicity of the statement broke something in Chiwetel. These elaborate tests, these expensive schemes, this whole catastrophic plan, and what his children wanted was the simplest thing in the world. His presence. His attention. His heart. I don't know if I can be what you need, he said honestly. I'm 72 years old. I've lived my whole life one way. Dr. Chen says I can change, but I don't know if that's true. I don't know if people really change or if we just get better at hiding our damage. Then don't change, Zainab said. Just try. Try to have a conversation that isn't about business. Try to ask us questions about our lives. Try to be uncomfortable with emotions instead of running away from them. Just try to. That's all we're asking. Nneka nodded. We're not expecting perfection. God knows we're not perfect. But we need to know you're willing to do the work. Not just say it but actually do it. Chiwetel looked at his children. He saw Amara in Nneka's eyes, his own stubbornness in Tobias's jaw, his mother's strength in Zainab's posture. They were pieces of him and pieces of people he'd loved and lost. They were everything he'd worked for and everything he'd neglected. I'll try, he said. I don't know if I'll be good at it. I'll probably fail more than I succeed. But I'll try. That's all we're asking, Nneka said. They talked for 3 more hours. Not about business or money or inheritance. They talked about feelings, about hurt, about the years of distance that had accumulated like dust in an abandoned house. It was awkward and painful and often uncomfortable. Chiwetel wanted to retreat to familiar territory dozens of times, wanted to talk about quarterly earnings or investment strategies. But each time, he forced himself to stay present. He learned that Nneka was thinking of leaving corporate law to do civil rights work. That she'd been afraid to tell him because she thought he'd see it as a step down, a waste of her expensive education. He learned that Tobias's failed startups weren't really failures at all. One had helped 15 families escape poverty. Another had created jobs in an underserved community. They hadn't made money, but they'd made a difference. Tobias had been trying to build something meaningful, not just profitable, and he'd thought Chiwetel would see that as weakness. He learned that Zainab had a girlfriend named Maya, a medical student she'd been dating for 2 years. That they were happy. That Zainab had wanted to introduce them but had been terrified of his reaction. Can I meet her? Chiwetel asked. Maya? Zainab looked shocked. Really? Really? If she's important to you, I want to know her. It was a small thing, but Zainab's eyes filled with tears. I'd like that. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, Nneka asked the question they'd all been avoiding. What about Mom? Chiwetel's heart sank. She won't see me. Won't take my calls. Dr. Chen says she needs time, but I don't think time is going to fix this. Have you apologized? Tobias asked. Tried. I've sent letters, messages through Dr. Chen. But she's made it clear that she's done with me. Maybe you're apologizing for the wrong things, Zainab suggested. Maybe she doesn't want you to apologize for the test. Maybe she wants you to apologize for all the years before the test. For not seeing her. For not being present. For letting her fight cancer alone. I didn't know about the cancer. But you should have, Nneka said gently. Dad, Mom was sick for 5 years. She was going through chemo. She was losing her hair. She was exhausted and in pain. And you didn't notice. Not because you couldn't see, but because you weren't looking. The truth of it cut deep. Chiwetel thought about all those evenings he'd worked late, all those business trips he'd taken. Amara had been suffering, and he'd been in his own world, oblivious. How do I fix that? He asked. I don't know if you can, Nneka admitted. But you can try. You can show her that you see her now. That you understand what you missed. That you're willing to change. As they prepared to leave, Tobias turned back. Dad? I know you're trying. And that matters. But I need you to understand something. This isn't about earning our forgiveness. This isn't another test you can pass. This is about building something real, even if it's messy and imperfect. Can you do that? Chiwetel thought about it. His whole life had been about passing tests, meeting goals, achieving benchmarks. The idea of something without a clear endpoint, without a metric for success, was foreign and terrifying. I can try, he said again. Before we find out what happens with Amara and whether this family can truly heal, I want to ask you something. What would you do if you were in Amara's position? Would you forgive someone who tested your love, or would you walk away? And if you were Chiwetel, how would you begin to make amends for decades of emotional absence? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I really want to know what you think. And if you're enjoying this story, please hit that subscribe button and give this video a like. Share it with someone who needs to hear this message about love, trust, and redemption. Now, let's see what Chiwetel does next. Over the next 3 months, Chiwetel's life became something he'd never experienced before, small. Not small in the diminishing sense, but small in the intimate sense. He stopped going to the office every day. He cut his work hours in half, something that would have been unthinkable before. He started meeting with Dr. Chen not 3 times a week, but 5. He was doing the work, the real internal work of examining who he'd been and who he wanted to become. He had dinner with Nneka every Tuesday. At first, they met at restaurants, neutral territory where the pressure was less intense. She told him about her cases, and he learned to listen without immediately offering business solutions. She told him about her doubts regarding corporate law, and instead of dismissing them, he asked questions. What would civil rights work look like? What cases interested her? What change did she want to create in the world? I never thought you'd actually care about this stuff, Nneka said one evening over Ethiopian food at a restaurant in Little 5 Points. I always cared, Chiwetel replied. I just didn't know how to show it except through money. Money's the easiest part of love, Nneka observed. It's the showing up that's hard. She was right. Showing up was hard. Required him to be present, to be vulnerable, to risk saying the wrong thing or feeling the wrong feeling. But he kept doing it. He met with Tobias every Friday. His son had started a new project, a nonprofit that taught business skills to formerly incarcerated people. It wouldn't make money. It might not even be sustainable long-term. But it was meaningful, and Chiwetel was learning that meaning mattered more than profit. I want to invest, Chiwetel said after Tobias explained the program. Dan, I don't want your money. I'm not offering money as a father. I'm offering it as an investor who believes in what you're building. There's a difference. They negotiated terms. Chiwetel insisted on a formal agreement, not because he didn't trust Tobias, but because he wanted his son to understand that this was a real investment in a real vision. The money came with mentorship, with Chiwetel using his business acumen to help Tobias build something sustainable. For the first time, they were working together, not in the shadow of disappointment but in the light of mutual respect. He had lunch with Zainab every Sunday. She brought Maya to the third lunch, nervous and defiant at the same time. Maya was brilliant, funny, and clearly loved his daughter. Chiwetel found himself liking her immediately, and more importantly, he told her so. You make my daughter happy, he said to Maya. That's all I've ever wanted for her, even if I didn't know how to show it. Zainab cried at the table, and for once, Chiwetel didn't panic at the sight of tears. He just held her hand and let her feel what she needed to feel. But through all of this, Amara remained absent. He wrote to her every week, letters that Dr. Chen reviewed before he sent them. They weren't grand declarations or elaborate apologies. They were simple, honest admissions of failure and expressions of love. I saw you were in the garden today, one letter read. I drove by the house, I know I shouldn't have, but I couldn't help it. The roses you planted are blooming. They're beautiful. I remember when we planted them, how you said they needed patience and attention to grow. I didn't understand then that you were talking about more than roses. I understand now. Another letter, I met with Tobias today. His nonprofit is incredible, Amara. Our son is changing lives. He got that from you, not from me. You're the one who always saw people, not just problems to solve. I'm trying to learn from you, even though you're not here to teach me. And another, Dr. Chen asked me today when I first realized I loved you. I told her it was the night we met at that conference in Chicago 30 years ago. You were presenting research on community development, and you were brilliant and passionate and so alive. But that's not true. I realized I loved you 6 months into our marriage, when I failed to get that loan and thought my business was over. You didn't offer solutions or money. You just held me and said, "We'll figure it out together." That's when I knew. And that's when I got scared, because I'd never had anyone offer to share the burden. I didn't know how to accept it, so I pushed you away. I've been pushing ever since. I'm sorry. The letters went unanswered, but Chiwetel kept writing. Not because he expected forgiveness, but because he needed to say the things he'd never said when she could hear them. Then, on a Wednesday afternoon in November, Dr. Chen called him. "Amara has agreed to meet with you," she said. "But there are conditions." "Anything," Chiwetel said immediately. "First, it's not about reconciliation. She wants you to understand that. This is about closure, not about getting back together. Second, it's on her terms. She chooses the location, the time, the duration. Third, I'll be there. She wants a mediator present." "I understand." "And Chiwetel? She's not well. The cancer has progressed. She's still fighting, but she's weaker than she was. You need to be prepared for that." His heart broke. "How bad is it?" "That's for her to tell you if she chooses. Just be prepared." They met at Piedmont Park on a Thursday morning. Chiwetel arrived early, nervous in a way he hadn't been since he was a young man. When Amara walked up, he barely recognized her. She'd lost weight, significant weight. The wig she wore was different from the one she'd had at the funeral. She moved slowly, carefully, as if each step required consideration. But her eyes were still fierce, still intelligent, still Amara. They sat on a bench overlooking the lake. Dr. Chen sat a small distance away, close enough to intervene if needed, far enough to give them privacy. "Thank you for seeing me," Chiwetel said. Amara nodded. "Dr. Chen says you've been doing the work. Going to therapy. Spending time with the children. But it's not enough. It'll never be enough to make up for." "Don't," Amara interrupted. "Don't make this about redemption or making up for things. That's too big. Let's just talk. Can we do that?" "Yes." They sat in silence for a moment, watching ducks glide across the water. "Do you remember our first apartment?" Amara asked. "In East Point. 600 square feet. The heat didn't work properly." "You hated it," she said, smiling slightly. "You kept apologizing, saying it was temporary, saying you'd give me better. I wanted to give you everything." "I know. But Chiwetel, I didn't marry you for everything. I married you for you." That man in that tiny apartment who was scared and ambitious and tender when he thought no one was looking. Somewhere along the way, you forgot that man existed. "I thought I needed to be more. To be successful, powerful, invulnerable. You thought wrong." She turned to look at him. "I loved you when you had nothing. The money didn't make me love you more. It just made you harder to reach." "Why didn't you tell me about the cancer?" Chiwetel asked, the question that had haunted him for months. Amara was quiet for a long time. "Because you would have made it about you," she said finally. "You would have blamed yourself, thrown money at treatments, tried to control the uncontrollable. And I needed to face this on my own terms, with my own strength. I couldn't carry both my illness and your inability to cope with it." The honesty stung, but Chiwetel didn't argue. She was right. "I'm sorry," he said. "I'm sorry I made you feel like you had to face it alone. I'm sorry I was so absent that you couldn't share your burden. I'm sorry I tested your love instead of trusting it. I'm sorry for all the years I wasted being afraid instead of being present." "I know," Amara said softly. "I've read your letters. All of them." "You have?" "Every single one. They're beautiful, Chiwetel. They're the words I waited 20 years to hear." "Then come back," he said, hope flooding through him. "Come home. Let me take care of you. Let me be there for you through this." But Amara shook her head. "I can't." "Why not?" "I've changed. I'm changing. I know it's not enough yet, but I'm trying." "It's not about whether you've changed," Amara said. "It's about what I need. And what I need right now is to focus on myself. On my health, my peace, my journey. I don't have the energy to rebuild a marriage while fighting cancer. I just don't. Tears were streaming down Chiwetel's face. So this is it? This is goodbye. This is closure, Amara corrected. This is me telling you that I forgive you. That I see your efforts. That I'm proud of the work you're doing with Dr. Chin and with our children. But forgiveness doesn't mean reconciliation. Sometimes love means letting go. I don't want to let go. I know. But this isn't about what you want anymore. For once, it has to be about what I need. She stood up slowly and Chiwetel stood with her. Will I see you again? He asked. Maybe. Probably. The children want us both at Christmas. I'm not going to deprive them of that. But Chiwetel, we're not going to be a couple again. We're going to be two people who share a history and children. That's all. That's not all, he said desperately. We're more than that. We were more than that, Amara said gently. But you killed Dui long before you faked your death. The funeral was just making it official. She reached up and touched his face, a gesture so familiar and so painful that Chiwetel thought his heart might stop. I hope you find peace, she said. I hope you build real relationships with our children. I hope you learn to trust love instead of testing it. And I hope, someday, you find someone who can meet you where you are now, instead of where you were. I don't want someone else. I want you. I know. But you can't have me. Some things, once broken, stay broken. That's not a tragedy. That's just truth. She walked away, and Chiwetel watched her go, understanding for the first time that love didn't always mean happy endings. Sometimes love meant accepting that you'd lost something precious, and living with that loss, and trying to be better because of it rather than bitter. Dr. Chin approached him. How are you feeling? Like I've lost everything that mattered. You haven't lost your children. They're still here, still willing to build a relationship with you. But not her. Not Amara. No, Dr. Chin agreed. Not her. But Chiwetel, she gave you something important today. She gave you closure. She gave you permission to move forward without guilt. That's a gift. It didn't feel like a gift. It felt like a door closing, final and irreversible. But as he drove home, past the house in Buckhead where he no longer lived, past the office where he'd spent so many years, past all the landmarks of his old life, Chiwetel realized something. He'd spent his whole life accumulating things. Money, property, success. But he'd never learned how to hold on to people. And now he was left with all the things and none of the people who'd mattered. The question was, what would he do with that realization? Would he retreat back into work and wealth? Or would he use this pain to become someone different? Someone better? For the first time in his life, Chiwetel chose the harder path. 8 months after the funeral that never was, Chiwetel Okonkwo sat in a conference room at Okonkwo Enterprises, surrounded by his board of directors. They were there to vote on a proposal he'd brought to them 2 weeks earlier. A proposal that would change everything. To summarize, said Janet Williams, the board chair, you want to convert Okonkwo Enterprises from a private corporation to a social benefit corporation. You want to redirect 40% of annual profits to the Okonkwo Family Foundation. And you want to step down as CEO, transitioning to an advisory role. That's correct, Chiwetel confirmed. Mr. Okonkwo, said David Park, the CFO, this will significantly impact shareholder value. It will change the fundamental nature of this company. Are you certain this is what you want? Chiwetel looked around the table at these people who'd helped him build his empire. I'm certain. This company was built on the idea that success means accumulation. More money, more power, more growth. But I've learned that real success is about impact. About what you leave behind. About how many lives you've touched, not how much wealth you've generated. That's a beautiful sentiment, Janet said carefully, but this is a business. It's my business, Chiwetel replied. And I'm choosing to run it differently. If the board won't support this, I'll sell my shares and start something new. But one way or another, I'm done building empires. I'm ready to build legacy. The vote was close, but it passed. Okonkwo Enterprises would become a social benefit corporation, committed to using business as a force for good. The foundation would fund scholarships, cancer research, immigrant entrepreneurship programs, and community development projects. The company would prioritize impact alongside profit. It wasn't what the old Chiwetel would have done. But the old Chiwetel was dead. He'd died in that casket at the church, or maybe he died years before that, slowly suffocated by fear and greed and isolation. That evening, Chiwetel had dinner with all three of his children at Nneka's apartment. It had become a weekly tradition, rotating whose home they met at. Tonight, Maya was there too, and Tobias had brought his new girlfriend, a woman named Ashley who ran a youth program. They cooked together, laughed together, told stories together. It was messy and loud and imperfect. It was nothing like the formal dinners they used to have at the Buckhead mansion. It was better. I voted to convert the company today, Chiwetel announced over the meal. It passed. Nneka smiled. Mom would be proud. The mention of Amara brought a moment of quiet. She was still alive, still fighting, but she'd moved to a hospice facility the month before. The cancer had progressed despite aggressive treatment. The doctors said she had weeks, maybe a month or two. Chiwetel visited her there every Sunday afternoon. They didn't talk much. Sometimes he read to her. Sometimes they just sat together, holding hands, existing in the same space. It wasn't the reconciliation he'd hoped for, but it was something. It was presence. I went to see Mom yesterday, Zainab said. She told me something interesting. What? Tobias asked. She said she's not angry anymore. Not at Dad, not at the cancer, not at anything. She said she's made peace with how things turned out. How can she be at peace? Chiwetel asked. I destroyed our marriage. Dad, Zainab interrupted, she doesn't see it that way. She said the marriage died a long time ago. You just made it official. But what's happening now, with you changing and building real relationships with us, she sees that as redemption. Not for the marriage, but for yourself. I don't feel redeemed, Chiwetel admitted. I feel like I'm constantly trying to catch up to where I should have been all along. That's called growth, Nneka said. That's what change looks like. It's not comfortable. It's not easy. But it's real. After dinner, Chiwetel stayed to help clean up. As they washed dishes, Tobias said, Dad, can I ask you something? Anything. Do you regret it? The test? The fake death? All of it? Chiwetel thought about it. The honest answer was complicated. I regret the pain it caused, he said finally. I regret losing Amara. I regret the years I wasted being afraid. But do I regret that it forced me to change? Sometimes we need to be broken completely before we can rebuild ourselves correctly. I just wish I'd been brave enough to change without having to blow up my life first. Would you have changed otherwise? Tobias pressed. I don't know. Probably not. I was too comfortable in my misery, too convinced I was right. Sometimes the universe has to hit you with a sledgehammer to get your attention. Well, consider yourself hammered, Tobias said with a slight smile. The following Sunday, Chiwetel made his usual visit to the hospice. But this time was different. When he walked into Amara's room, he found all three children there, along with Amara's sister Kemi and several close friends. Amara was in bed, propped up by pillows. She looked smaller than ever, as if she was slowly disappearing. But she was smiling. I'm glad you're here, she said to Chiwetel. I wanted everyone together. He sat in the chair beside her bed, suddenly understanding. This was it. She was saying goodbye. I want to tell you all something, Amara said, her voice weak but clear. I'm not afraid. I've fought hard, and now I'm tired and I'm ready. But before I go, I need to say some things. She looked at each of her children. Nneka, you're going to be an incredible civil rights lawyer. Trust your instincts. Trust your passion. The world needs people who are willing to fight for justice, not just for profit. Tobias, your failures aren't failures. They're experiments. They're evidence that you're trying to make a difference. Keep trying. The world needs people who are willing to risk comfort for meaning. Zainab, love who you love proudly. Live authentically. Dance like the artist you are. The world needs people who are brave enough to be themselves. Then she turned to Chiwetel. My complicated, brilliant, frustrating husband. You've changed more in 8 months than I thought possible. You've proven that it's never too late to become the person you're meant to be. I want you to know that I see it. I see your effort. I see your growth. And I'm proud of you. Amara, Chiwetel's voice broke. I'm so sorry. For everything. For all the years. For all the ways I failed you. I know, she said gently. And I forgive you. But more importantly, you need to forgive yourself. You need to let go of the guilt and the regret and just live. Really live. Be present for our children. Build relationships. Create joy. That's how you honor me. Not by mourning what you lost, but by treasuring what you still have. Over the next few hours, they sat together. They shared stories and memories. They laughed and cried. They said all the things that needed to be said. It wasn't sad, exactly. It was bittersweet. It was goodbye, but it was also a celebration of a life lived, imperfectly but fully. Amara died 3 days later, peacefully in her sleep. This time, there was a real funeral. And this time, Chiwetel didn't watch from the shadows. He sat in the front row with his children, openly crying, openly grieving, openly present. When it was his turn to speak, he didn't have a prepared speech. He just spoke from his heart. Amara was a better person than I deserved, he said. She loved with a depth and generosity that I couldn't comprehend. She fought battles I didn't notice. She carried burdens I refused to share. And even at the end, even after everything I did, she offered me grace. He looked out at the congregation, many of the same people who'd been at the first funeral. 8 months ago, I stood in a church and faked my own death because I didn't trust the people who loved me. Today, I stand in a church mourning the real death of a woman who loved me despite every reason not to. The difference is, today I understand what I lost. Today I know the value of what I threw away. Today I'm not testing love, I'm feeling it. All of it. The pain, the regret, the gratitude, the grief. He paused, composing himself. If there's anything I can tell you, it's this: don't wait. Don't wait to tell people you love them. Don't wait to be present. Don't wait to trust. Don't wait to be vulnerable. Because one day you'll run out of time. And all the money in the world can't buy you another moment. After the service, as people filed out, Jerome approached Chiwetel. I'm proud of you, brother, Jerome said. You did the work. I'm still doing the work, Chiwetel replied. Every day. It doesn't end. No, Jerome agreed. But that's life, isn't it? It's not about reaching some perfect destination. It's about showing up every day and trying to be a little bit better than you were yesterday. 6 months after Amara's death, on what would have been her 52nd birthday, the Okonkwo Family Foundation opened its first scholarship center. It was housed in a beautiful building in downtown Atlanta, designed to help first-generation African immigrants pursue higher education. Above the entrance was a plaque that read, "In memory of Amara Okonkwo, who taught us that love is not tested, it is trusted." At the opening ceremony, Chiwetel stood with his children, cutting the ribbon together. Reporters asked him about the foundation, about his transformation, about the infamous fake death that had made headlines. I was a billionaire who had everything except what mattered, Chiwetel told them. I faked my death to test my family, and what I discovered was that I was the one who'd failed the test. I'd failed to be present, failed to trust, failed to love without conditions or suspicions. Do you regret the test? A reporter asked. Chiwetel thought about it. I regret the pain it caused, but I'm grateful for what it taught me. It broke me open in a way that nothing else could have. It forced me to examine who I was and who I wanted to be. And it gave me the chance, however late, to build real relationships with my children. What would you say to others who are struggling to trust their loved ones? I'd say that trust is a choice, not a feeling. Fear tells us to protect ourselves, to test others, to keep our guards up. But love requires vulnerability. It requires taking the risk that people might hurt us. And yes, sometimes they will. But the alternative is living in a prison of your own making, surrounded by wealth or success or security, but utterly alone. That night, Chiwetel returned to his new apartment. He'd sold the Buckhead mansion, unable to live in a place that held so many memories of absence. His new place was smaller, simpler. It had enough room for him and for when his children visited. He sat on his balcony, looking out at the Atlanta skyline. He thought about the journey that had brought him here. From a poor boy in Lagos to a billionaire in America. From a man who had everything to a man who'd lost everything to a man who was learning what everything really meant. His phone rang. It was Zainab. Hated. Maya and I are getting married. We wanted you to be the first to know. Joy flooded through him. That's wonderful. I'm so happy for you both. We want you to walk me down the aisle, Zainab said. If you want to. I would be honored. And Dad? We're going to have a baby. We're using a donor. We're adopting. I don't know yet. But Maya and I want to be mothers, and I wanted you to know that you're going to be a grandfather. Chiwetel felt tears streaming down his face. A grandfather. I don't know if I'll be any good at it. You'll be great, Zainab said. Because you'll be present. That's all that matters. After they hung up, Chiwetel sat in the darkness, thinking about the future. About the grandchildren he would really know. About the relationships he was building with his children. About the foundation that would help thousands of people pursue their dreams. He would never get Amara back. He would never undo the years of damage. But he could move forward. He could be different. He could choose, every single day, to show up and be present and trust love instead of testing it. In the end, that was what the story was about. Not redemption, exactly. Not a happy ending tied up with a neat bow. But transformation. The painful, messy, ongoing process of becoming a better person. Chiwetel Okonkwo had faked his own death to test his family. What he discovered was that his wife's love was real, his children's love was real, and his own fears were the only lies in his life. And sometimes that's what it takes. Sometimes we have to lose everything to understand what we had. Sometimes we have to die, symbolically or actually, to learn how to truly live. The billionaire who tested his family learned the hardest lesson of all: love can't be earned or proven or tested. It can only be accepted or rejected. And he'd spent a lifetime rejecting it, not because it wasn't offered, but because he was too afraid to believe it was real. But fear is a choice. And so is trust. And so is love. And every day, Chiwetel woke up and chose differently than he had before. Not perfectly. Not easily. But intentionally. With presence. With vulnerability. With hope that even after everything, even at 73 years old, it wasn't too late to learn how to love and be loved. That's the real ending. Not a fairy tale where everything is fixed, but a real story where a broken man does the hard work of becoming whole. Where a family torn apart finds new ways to be connected. Where grief and joy coexist. Where mistakes have lasting consequences, but also create opportunities for growth. Chiwetel Okonkwo died at his own fake funeral. And in his place, a different man was born. Not perfect. Not redeemed. But present. Finally, actually, genuinely present. And in the end, presence was the greatest gift he could give. To his children, to himself, and to the memory of the woman who'd loved him enough to let him go so he could find his way back to himself. That's what his wife did that made us cry. She loved him enough to set him free. She loved him enough to tell him the truth. She loved him enough to let him fail so he could learn what really mattered. And that's the kind of love that changes everything.